To WaveTalkers Live. This is episode number 109. Today we're talking about a hurricane exercise and participating in that. My name is Chris Mattia. My amateur radio call sign is Whiskey 6 Alpha Hotel. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues David W0DHG, Dan NR6V, and Scott KM6RFB. Let's get right into today's check-in. So if you can pull everybody down here real quick. If you have access to Winlink, then go ahead and send us a Winlink check-in. Use the standard Winlink check-in form. Send it to all four of us. Our call signs are W0DHG, NR6V, KM6RFB, W6AH, and our tactical address is WaveTalkers. Use the standard Winlink check-in form, and down in the comments section, let us know what your plans are for Field Day, which is coming up next week. By the way, if you're watching this, next week for Field Day, we will not be doing a live show. We will all be playing Field Day with that. So please enjoy your Field Day next week. Let's go ahead and jump over and do that check-in real quick. I'm going to jump over to my walk-up machine here. And I've got my copy of Winlink already up and running. What you're going to do to send in that check-in is you're just going to come over here to the top of the menu bar and click on the new message button. Then up in the top of that, you'll click on the button that says Select Template. When that opens up, it should open up your template manager. You're going to give a click next to Standard Templates. And what you're looking for is the general form section. We'll come down here. We'll give that a click. Down near the bottom of that, you should find the Winlink check-in.txt. Go ahead and give that a double click. And what it should do is it should open up your web browser. At the top of the web browser field, there's a date and time field. You always want to give that a click, and that's going to set the current date and time according to your computer in the form. That way the form is submitted with all of the correct information. I'll go ahead and select OK for that. Here's the to field. This is where you want to list all of our call signs. Just separate each of those with a semicolon. Again, those are W0DHG, NR6V, KM6RFB, W6AH, and our tactical address is WaveTalkers. In the From field, this is where you're going to list your call sign, the station contact name. This is going to be your name. In the Initial Operators section, let us know of any additional operators that might be sitting there watching the show with you, whether this be live here during our regular time here on Sunday, or if you're watching the event time shifted on either our YouTube channel, our Facebook channel, our LinkedIn channel, or on our website. It's available on all of those different locations. So thanks a lot for joining us in those. For the session, this is going to be an exercise, so just go ahead and leave it set to exercise. Service, let us know if you're sending this in via amateur radio or via the Shares Network. For band, let us know how you're sending that in. If you're using the internet, go ahead and leave it set to Telnet. Or if you're sending it in via RF, then send it in via HF, VHF, UHF, or so forth. For the session, let us know how you're sending that traffic in, whether it be Telnet, Packet, Pactor, or so forth. Just go ahead and select those. That way you'll show up as the correct colored pin when we map all of these in a little while. Speaking of mapping, here's the location information. Go ahead and select that and let us know where you're checking in from. Even if you just tell us the state that you're checking in from, that'll help us be able to sort and find out the information of where everybody's coming in. The latitude and longitude, these should automatically be filled in for you, and they're going to be filled in either based on the center of your grid square, which you should have entered in here once you've initially signed up for Winlink, or if you've got a GPS connected to your station, then they may be having a more accurate GPS coordinates here for you. Here's that comment section. This is where you want to let us know what your plans are for Field Day, and we'll say playing Field Day with my team. Down on the bottom, there is a submit button. Go ahead and click the submit button when you're ready. You'll get a couple of these pop-ups that'll show up. You can just hit OK until the browser window goes blank, at which time you can just close your browser window and all of those data should be entered into that message right here. The message is all set up, ready to go, so we'll go ahead and post that to the outbox. You should see your outbox increment by 1. Then you want to come up to your toolbar. Here's that session type. Go ahead and make sure you click on the session type drop down and you select the way that you're going to send this in, whichever mode you're going to use. I'm going to leave mine set to the telnet option. I'll just use the internet, hit the open session button, and when it comes up, you're just going to hit the start button, and depending on how your radio and your station is all set up, your traffic should go up. It looks like we have check-ins coming in from around the planet. We'll go ahead and download those, and later on in the show, we'll check back in and we'll map all of those check-ins to see where everyone is coming in. If you are watching this later in the week, not live, please go ahead and still send in a check-in. We do check those all week long and make sure we get all the check-ins that have come in for each of our episodes. With that, let me jump back over to our slides and let's get into today's topic. Now, earlier this week on June 13th, there was a large-scale exercise that took place, and this was run out of North Carolina. This took place on the 13th of June. There were about 160 agencies that participated in that exercise. Roughly 61 of the organizations were all outside of North Carolina. What's really nice about this exercise is it was fully virtual. It was fully online. So people could participate from all over and follow along with the exercise. We're going to walk through in a lot of detail some of the all of the sequence for one of the types of participants in today's episode. There were actually two groups that were out here in California that participated. The LA Fire Department's ACS group and the Placer County Aries group are the two stations that were furthest west of North Carolina that participated. And there were multiple stations that are WaveTalkers group, WaveTalker stations that did participate. Several of them are here on the call with us today. So let's dive in a little bit deeper into this. And I've got the URL there at the top. If you wanted to just pause the video, you can go ahead and grab the URL and you can get to the detailed page for the exercise and find out all of the information. Matter of fact, if you go on this page and you scroll down, you'll find a link to the actual exercise page, which looks something like this. On the right-hand side, this whole exercise was incredibly well laid out, incredibly well organized. It was really brilliantly done. And we're going to look at a few of these. So the top item here, this is the situational manual, or the SITMAN, that was made available. It's a full manual for everything that was going on within the exercise. There was an initial exercise briefing, and this was in the video format. It was part of one of the very first tasks, was to be able to watch what was going on in the briefing, so you were able to then begin following along. And there were little hints that were embedded within that. It's a really, really well done setup here. The next is the master exercise task list. This is called the measle, and that is the primary document that people were following as they were working through this. We're going to look at this in a lot more detail in just a minute. There was also an Oxcom shared documents for those folks who were participating that were outside of North Carolina, and a COMEX reference docs. So there was a lot of additional documents that were made available to everyone. And then some other additional information for registering and so forth. But this is the core of what was available within the exercise to be able to follow along. Let's take a more detailed look, though, at the measle. So the measle is called the Master Scenario Events List. And basically there were a variety of different roles that were of different groups that were participating. I'll go ahead and pull myself down so you can see this just incredible list. So of those agencies, there were some from public safety, there were hospitals, PSAP, which is 911 dispatch centers, MCVs, the Coast Guard, ITSLs, other specialty groups, and then two different Oxcom groups, one that was a single resource and ones that were supporting emergency management or agencies having jurisdiction. We're going to look and walk through the measle for the OXCs that were the emergency managers and agencies having jurisdiction, because those are the ones that were participating. And actually, let me bring him up here real quick, because the person who was the person on our team who participated in this was Scott. Hey, Scott, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great, and glad to be here.
Thanks. Let's start diving in. I want to kind of go in a little bit more. So when you would open up that the document that was the measle, when you first opened it up, you were able to scroll down through this huge long list, and there were all of these individual PDFs that had a lot of details in it. And when you first got in there and you looked at it, there was this example page that showed you how all the information was going to be organized for your particular task or your particular role. Then you could get in, there was a 205 associated with it. It was a high level 205 because this was going to be a virtual exercise. That information was made available to everyone. And then you got into the real meat of what the exercise was. So you can see there, highlighted in green, that is item number 1, task number 1. Scott, you want to tell us a little bit what that task was?
Yeah, so keep in mind, this whole exercise started on East Coast time, and being on West Coast means it started at about 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was an early day to get all this going. And task number 1, and they didn't open up the links until exactly start time. So there was no way to kind of prepare or kind of prep all your exercises before this. So you literally had to wait until they released the links to get into this. And one of the big thing is you had to fill out. So if you look across the screen here in the last column, where it's notes and answers, you had to put answers to these tasks and then send this back to them to show that you did it. And one of the most important things is you had to listen to this briefing. And within that briefing, they gave a verbal designator that you had to put into that last column to show that you truly listened to the briefing. So that was really important. And so that designator was Oscar. And so you had to write that in there before, and then as part of that briefing, they went through kind of and said, look, you've got these tasks. We'd like you to complete them all. You have to complete at least some of them. We don't want you to return a blank measle back to us. So there was stuff that I could do and stuff I couldn't do just based on my location and what I had access to. And so first one was listen to the briefing, which was only like about a half hour at best, 15 minutes maybe, and then move on from there. And then they said, go. Keep in mind, all of this, every bit of it was virtual. There was no physical exercise taking place to what I understand.
Excellent. So Scott, how many tasks did you have to complete that were inside of this measle for you for the role that you were participating as?
Again, they specified to complete as many as you possibly could. There wasn't a set number that said you had to do this many or this minimum. It's just complete as much as you possibly can and send it in. So
and in this task book, in this measle that was there were 22 tasks that were listed for you to complete. So what we're going to do for the rest of this episode, we're actually going to step through each of these tasks, and we're going to identify what was done, how, kind of a high level of what the task was. We'll also point out, as we were later on in the week when Scott called me up and he's like, hey, I went through this whole exercise, and he was telling me about how helpful a lot of the WaveTalkers previous episodes have been for him to be able to complete all of these tasks. And when we started mapping it out, we realized, wow, there are a ton of episodes that we've done all related to Winlink that really help folks complete these tasks. So what we're going to do is we're going to cross map all of the episodes that we've done also to each of these. So if you ever decided you wanted to go back and either create a exercise similar to this, or you wanted to step through how you would maybe complete something like this, you can go in and you can see from this episode how you could map and find additional information that would help you complete those tasks. So let's dive in. I'm going to pull myself down here for a second. And let's go into task number 2. So what was task number 2?
So before we get to task 2, so let it be said that there were 22 tasks, but some of the tasks had multiple subtasks. So it grew a lot as you went through it. So task number 2, start an ICS 214 form. And they wanted you to start an ICS 214. They weren't concerned about what ICS 214, whether it was a PDF or where you got it. I chose to use the Winlink ICS 214 to make it easier, because I knew at the end of the exercise, listening to the briefing, that we had to send in our 214. And what an easy way to do it would be to do it right within the document of Winlink to make that possible. And so I just, on my computer screens, I left the 214 open at all times and just kept adding to it as I moved through it.
So one of the things that we've got here on the screen, so we did episode number 65, and we walked through a whole bunch of the ICS forms that are available inside of Winlink. We did a high-level walkthrough of a lot of those, and I've also listed here 5 other episodes. So if you're new to using Winlink, these would be 5 that you could target in order to help you get in and be able to use Winlink to be able to complete some of these tests. And these are kind of the baseline episodes that you may want to watch. So episode 16, which is it's an up and running, a getting started with Winlink. Episode number 63 was radio interfaces for VARA, specifically how do you configure VARA for your radio. Episode number 21, we talked about digipeating, and depending on the area where you're at, this may or may not be relevant to you to be able to figure out how you can maybe connect to another digipeater, another station, and pass your traffic into a gateway. We then have episode 17, which targets VARA HF, and episode 53, which is about VARA FM. So, Scott, let me quickly jump over real quick into my walk up here, because I want to show folks how we would go ahead and start that 214. So let me pull you down here for a second so people are able to see my screen. So I'm here inside of Winlink, and for the 214, if I come up here and I click on the new message button and then come over here to select templates, we'll go ahead and click on that. It's going to open up the template manager like we just saw with our check-in. We're going to come down here to the little plus next to standard templates, and in the lower portion, here's a folder called ICS USA Forms. If you give that a click, this is going to open up a whole bunch of the forms that are available here inside of Winlink, and one of them you'll see is the ICS 214, and there's also the 214A, which is the individual activity log. Both of these kind of work combined, and depending on the location where you're at. So for instance, in California, we would actually submit the 214A, whereas in other locations, they may just do the 214. Let me go ahead and open up that 214, and you can see when it opens it up, it looks exactly like the form that you would find on the main Winlink website, or the main ICS page, and we have a link to that dedicated form on our WaveTalkers site. So if you go to WaveTalkers and you click on resources, there's a pop-up there for ICS forms, and you can get directly to that. But it's pretty straightforward. You fill in the incident name here. The page, you usually start with page 1, the operational period that you're working with. So this would be the start time of when you begin working on this, what your name is, the position that you're filling here in the ICS structure, your home agency that you're working with, and then these are the locations. Here you're going to list any of the different positions. So maybe if you're working in a small team and you're all collecting all that information together, those would all be listed here for individuals. Otherwise, if it's just you, it would be just your information again here. And then down in this section, this is where you're going to begin filling in the date and time. And again, this is just like any other Winlink form. If you just click on that, it's going to automatically fill in the current date and time for you, and then you just come over here to the notable activity. So as you're working through the activities that you're doing, you just pop over into this browser window and you're able to click in here. Now what Scott did in order to keep working on this, so he started the exercise as maybe the first item that's there, and what he was doing is he literally just minimized his browser. So he had that message ready to go. Anytime he wanted to come back to it, he could just come back, click on it, bring up his browser window, and just keep working through it. So if you're working on an exercise or you're at a deployment, and you need to fill out a 214, this is a great way to be able to do this because it's all embedded here inside of Winlink. And when you're finished, you'll just submit the form. And we'll see what that looks like later in the show. So at that, let me bring Scott back up here and let's move on to the next task. So task 3, what was task 3, Scott?
So task 3 is creating an ICS 205. You could have done, if you didn't have one, you could create it within Winlink. Again, we can talk about that as well as, again, one of those forms. But for me, I went ahead and had a pre-created 205 for my Aries group of our comm plan. And
hey, what is 205?
It is the incident communication plan. It is built off of the ICS 217, which has a list of all your frequencies that you would be using, and you take those frequencies and those channels and you put them into the 205 to build this comm plan out. And the comm plan is what's given to everybody at the incident or at the event. Or if you have a communication plan for your group, this would be a pre-laid out set of frequencies that your group would operate off of in the event of a training exercise, an event, something where you needed to have where everybody had the same information. And again, you find the same information, you basically select on templates, go to standard templates and forms, go down again to the ICS forms, and then scroll down for the 205.
And it says 205 radio plan.txt is the one you're looking for.
Yep.
You double click it and it looks like this. It looks very similar to what you would see in the official form, and you just fill out all the information that's in here. Again, in that episode, which was episode number 65, we walked through this process in a lot more detail. So we're not going to do that here right now, but you would be able to go ahead and fill all of that information in at that point. And we'll go ahead, Scott.
So the idea behind this was that for participants outside of the impacted area or inside the impacted area, if you're participating with the group, they wanted to see that as part of the task, you had something created that you're working off of.
All right, let's look at the next one. So task 4.
Task 4 is PACE plans. And we're going to get a little bit more into PACE plans here in the next couple of slides. But, every group should have a PACE plan. And I think where a lot of this ends is you need to have a PACE plan for every aspect of your organization. And that can be a PACE plan for communication, a PACE plan for power, a PACE plan for transportation. What is your PACE plan talking about for each event? It's not a one plan fits all type of scenario. So, and as the slide says, make it work, make it better, make it faster. But what's really important here is you have to remember when you develop a PACE plan is your PACE plan doesn't rely upon the same technology, especially for communications. Because if you lose your whole aspect of communication, you lose your whole PACE plan. So how am I what's going to be my backup? So you want to bring in different technologies to build your PACE plan.
Yeah, and as Scott was mentioning, you want to make sure that you have different PACE plans that are associated with different categories of things. So you may want to have a PACE plan for your power structure, a PACE plan for how you're going to send email, a PACE plan for various different aspects of what you need and your organization needs. So here's an example of, say, maybe an email PACE plan that would start off with internet connectivity. And as Scott mentioned, internet connectivity could take a variety of different forms, but if you lose the internet for one reason or another, then you would want to go to some additional PACE plan. So maybe you're going to an established network of gateways that you're going to send Winlink traffic on. That's going to be localized gateways that you're going to be working with. And maybe those localized gateways end up going completely out. Another step would be maybe you're going to set up a tactical gateway. We talked about that in episode number 204, where we went into a little more detail about gateways and pace plans that are there. And finally, if all of that fails, then you want to have another rung down for your emergency level, where maybe you're just using voice with that. So excellent talk there.
So keep in mind, PACE stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. That's what PACE stands for.
Task 5. What was task 5?
Task 5 also goes back to your communication plan. Having pre-set up tactical nets. These are typically simplex or direct frequencies that have been pre-established on your comm plan for stuff that you don't want going over the repeater. This could be a tactical, could be for the facility you're working in, or it's a designated area that doesn't broadcast out to everybody, and where it can all be heard. So you want to establish what are your tactical nets, and again, that goes back to what frequencies do you have available to you or your group to establish tactical frequencies.
So back in episode number 1, like literally back in the beginning of when we were doing WaveTalkers, just walking through some of the basics of Winlink, we did a demonstration of a combined tactical net that was for digital and voice traffic. And we even split that out into a little small video. If you go onto our YouTube channel, you can find it. We called it 1.5. And we showed how to work back and forth between passing digital traffic and voice traffic all on one frequency. And that could be a designated tactical frequency that you were operating on to be able to do just that. We've done this on a couple of other episodes as well, but that's when you could go in and jump in and find that information.
So look at it from a DIS perspective. We'll take it from my world of public safety. When we went to a scene, we were dispatched on a command channel. And when we arrived on scene, we would tell dispatch, we've arrived, and there would be a pre-established, or if I was first in, I would ask for a TAC channel. So, and what that does is it moves all the operations off of the repeater to a localized area. And those are really critical so you don't tie up a repeater out there.
Excellent. Let's look at task 6. What was task 6 about?
Sending Winlink attachments, and one of the attachments they wanted us to send was a picture of our workstation, of what we're doing. Again, this was verification that we're actually doing something. We're not just going through the motions, and they wanted to have a picture, and then you had to send it by Winlink to them. So it required taking a picture, importing it into as an attachment to Winlink, and then sending it to a pre-designated Winlink address back in North Carolina, so they could physically see my workstation or whoever workstation there was. And as you can see, this is my workstation, and for my computers, and I would turn around and I could get to the radios.
And we did an entire episode number 28, where we walked through how to send Winlink attachments. And many people think, oh, sending an attachment is really easy. Inside of Winlink, it's a little bit trickier to be able to do. Here, let me show you where that link is real quick. I'm going to jump back over and pull Scott down for just a second so that we can see my screen a little bit better. And so here inside of Winlink, if you open up a new message, then you can come over and there's an option off to where it is down here at the bottom where it says attach. You go ahead and click on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up the attachment window that's there. You can go through and you have to kind of step through this as a manual process. You hit the add button, and then you can go in and you can find the document that you want to add. And this works similar to a lot of the regular email systems that you may find. But one of the things that you run into a lot of times, if you go in, let's grab a picture here, and I'll open up this particular image. Notice that you get a warning sign that's here that says, hey, you know what? WinLink traffic is limited to a particular file size. You're not allowed to send traffic over a particular size. And that's because many of us are using RF to be able to do that. And if you send a very large attachment, that traffic is not going to go over there. So you may need to come in and use there's some built-in resize and edit tools that are in here. You can manipulate, you can then cancel this if you needed to, go in and manipulate on other software that you have, maybe compress the file down a little bit in order to get your attachment under the limit that's set inside of WinLink. And when you're all finished, you would hit finished and it would go ahead and do that attachment. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one because this is way too large of an image. But if you go back to episode number 29, we went into a lot of detail in that episode as to how you can go ahead and work with all of that information. Let's jump back.
And that's a great point, and it's because I did all this through Telnet, knowing, and once I figured out that there was going to be a lot of products I had to produce and move, and they could be rather large files, I opted to use Telnet just because I didn't want to tie up the gateways with moving a lot of traffic. And so for this exercise, I was using Telnet.
So let's look at task number 7. What was that about?
Hospital infrastructure. And so when you read the exercise plan, it talked about groups within the impacted area and groups outside the impacted area. And since I was outside the impacted area, I didn't have to send a hospital infrastructure status report. Some groups, some of the people like Kathy and some others were inside the impacted area, and they were required to send an infrastructure. Since I was outside, I was asked to send a hospital bed report. And keep in mind, being outside the impacted area, the medical system infrastructure is going to be overwhelmed real quickly. And so they need to find out from outside the area what is the bed capacity of facilities that they may send. Would they send people out to California? It's possible. And they need to know what type of capacity and what can be taken so they can develop their plan back in the impacted area. So I sent in 3 hospital reports from 3 local area hospitals to that. And where do we find this? Again, we open up a message and we go to select templates and we go down to standard template versions. And now this time they wanted us to grab it under the mapping and GIS forms right below ICS. And then if you go down, I think you'll see bed report, and then the one right below it is hospital status. So those were the 2 ones that they were asking for. And so I did the hospital report. And so what they wanted here was, obviously, if you scroll back up to the top, Chris, they wanted you to, everything had to be annotated, this is an exercise. That way they knew that this wasn't part of a real event that was coming in. So everything done in this exercise was prefaced by, this is an exercise in there. So as we did this, as Chris goes back to it, hospital bed report.
Yeah, I was going to go into the hospital.
Okay, and then hospital status talked about what is the status of the hospital. And then I believe Kathy had to do this report, and she got in communication with her hospital rep, and they went over this.
This is a great bit of information that you may be asked to be able to submit to a agency during a real event or during an exercise. So knowing where these forms are, knowing how to be able to use them is really critical, really important to be able to do.
One of the most important pieces of information they wanted on the form, couple pieces, was contact information. Who at the hospital do I contact if I need to talk to them? And the other piece was Latin long. Where is the hospital? Because there's no place for an address. If I just put Mercy Folsom on here, they don't know where that's at. And so they needed to know Latin long so they could map this at their end so they could plot this out effectively. And so big pieces of information were contact phone numbers and email address so they could physically reach out to this person and say, hey, is this report still valid?
All right, let's move on to task number 8. What was that one about?
So basically, this all goes back to nets. When we talked about tactical nets, so they wanted us to either start a net or join a net. And again, this goes back to your agency or your group's plans. Do you have a net control plan? And how does that plan work? How do I start a net? How do I end a net? Is it a directed net? Is it a non-directed net? So a lot of this talks about, how do you establish a net? So it was really a key piece of information there.
And back in episode number 81, we stepped through this process and talked about some of the best practices for participating in a net, for starting a net, and so forth. So go ahead and check that out if you'd like to find a little more information about how you might be able to approach this. Let's look at task number 9. This was a big one. This was the first one where you had to a lot of subparts to it, right?
Yeah, if you could back up real quick, Chris.
Yeah, sure.
That last slide. So this RCCE, this was my contact back in North Carolina that I had to send a lot of my information to. This was their comm center. So, and that, I just want people to know what that is. So go ahead and go forward.
Great.
Yeah. So remember I talked about that there were 22 tasks and there were subtasks under some of these. And this is where it got interesting, is because task number 9 said you had to go find some injects. And well, where do I find the injects? And if you don't know how to use the catalog system, this is where the injects were within Winlink. And Chris, if you want to go ahead and bring up Winlink. So we talked about catalog requests in the past. So how do I find those catalog requests? So right where his pointer is, you would click on that, the catalog request. It would open. And then if you could see right here where it says EHPC COMEX, third one down, and click on it, there were injects there. Hey, Chris, go ahead and update your injects via the internet real quick to show the other injects. There we go. So you had to do these in order. You had to get inject number 1, and then you would double click on it, and it would appear over here. Because there was a certain task you had to do, and then you would post the request, and then send it through an open session.
And we're going to get a lot of traffic that's coming in from folks who are sending their check-ins. Love to see that. It may take us a minute or two to get that inject to come back in, but just like any good cooking show, we've gone ahead and baked this in. So this is the message that would have come back in inject number 1 that we would have gotten.
And so what it's telling me that I had to go out and do was, okay, now that you've got inject number 1, now go to inject number 2, go to the catalog, and request inject number 2, and here it is. Basically, it's saying that they don't have contact with who this needs to go to, so they want me or the individual to create an ICS 213 in Winlink. So now we have to go back to the forms in Winlink to create, and if Chris wants to bring that down, then go back to your message, create a new, select a template, and go to ICS forms and go down to 213 general message and open it up. You had to go through and cut and paste all that information into this one and then send it to them. And then after that, it would said next download. So if you go back to 3 or 2,
now we're on inject 3. Yeah, okay.
It would say download inject 3, and then you can see at the bottom of this one, now go get inject number 4. And after each one, you had to go get each inject because each one was based off of the other one. And so that required you to go back to the catalog several times and request these, and they didn't come immediately. You had to wait a few minutes for them to appear. And then the final inject would be to send in your hospital information to them as well, and also send in your log your 309 and all that, which we'll get to a little bit later. So that was inject number 6. So there were 6 subparts to this one task.
Next task would be task number 10. What's that one about?
Again, it goes back to testing your pace plan. In other words, again, consult. So they gave us a pace plan. And where did we find that? It was in the exercise manual. And then we had to contact the RCC any way we could, either and then provide them with information. I opted to call them. I looked at the pace plan and said, okay, here's the phone number I'm supposed to call. And then again, and it was really interesting because their phone number, if I'm not mistaken, to their front desk or the main desk was 4932. To the radio room, it was 4923. Well, I quickly looked at it and transposed the numbers, and I got a hold of the lady at the front desk. I go, this is an exercise. I'm so-and-so. And she's like, huh? And I'm like, oh. And she goes, I think you dialed the wrong number. And I went back and went, oh, yeah, I did. And so I dialed the other number, got a hold of the radio room and said, this is an exercise. I am so-and-so. And they said, okay, who are you with? What's your discipline? And they gave me some more information, and I went on my way. So I had to make a physical contact with their COMU in North Carolina. So keep in mind, the exercise ran from about 5 o'clock my time to 12 o'clock my time. So that was my operating time to get to them.
Let's have a look at task number 11, which was about passing voice traffic.
Absolutely. And again, this goes back to, contact, pass the following message by voice. Well, since I didn't have HF set up to be able to do it, and obviously VHF and UHF wouldn't have gotten me there, and I'm not part of their Viper system, so I couldn't complete this task. And that's okay, because they said up front, you're not going to be able to complete all the tasks, everybody, because of certain things. But what was that message, Chris? Did we get that down?
No, this was a 213 that they sent. I didn't add it into the overall thing, but you had to pass the traffic that was sent in that you were going to go in and download. So it was an example of how you could go in and get some practice being able to do that.
Absolutely.
So task 12, simulated power outage.
Yeah, and so again, they want you to test your pace plan. What is your power pace plan? If you lose power, what's your next step? And then they wanted you to go from your primary and backup batteries are used up, and you can't use your vehicle. So what is your next step in your pace plan?
Last year around this time, we did an entire series of episodes getting ready for field day. One of the episodes we talked about was choosing the best field day power source for being able to operate. And we actually walked through a pace plan of a lot of different choices that you may want to use for alternative power. We also looked at antennas and a variety of other different properties for it. And we've done many other episodes where we talked about using solar panels and preparing your equipment and so forth. So it's definitely something that you want to make sure that you're well prepared to be able to handle within emergency communications. Task number 13. What was this one about?
So if we look at that slide one more time, and if you've got no commercial power, your backup batteries are used up. I mean, so someone just put in the chat, if you guys can, what would be another method of power? And just put it in the chat. That's all. So go ahead and go, Chris. And the other thing they wanted to know, like on task 13, was your station health check. Again, that goes back to making sure how is your station working, and it talks about antenna tuning. And they wanted you to take a picture of your radio. They wanted to see that you're actually doing something. And so one of my radios, it shows my power output, and it showed a lot of information. So I sent this picture back to them so they can see that I'm actually doing something out there.
And we walked through in episode number 47 a variety of different tools and techniques for tuning your antenna to be able to optimize to get the lowest SWR you can, to optimize so that you're getting the most power out of your radio to be able to transfer those out as well as you can. That's a good test there. Let's look at task number 14.
Yeah, and task 14 is a really interesting task because I had actually taken my DMR radio. I had my DMR radio at a different location, but they wanted us to communicate by digital mobile radio through their talk group, and it's like, okay, and so keep in mind, DMR requires the internet, so you have to think about that in your PACE plan as well. But however this could be through whatever you talk about in your communication plan and through your PACE plan. This could be GMRS, this could be MERS, this could be anything. What they want you to do here is test your communications with other people, and especially your commu unit or your dispatch center.
Task number 15. What was that one about?
Wow, this one was interesting. Task 15, again, required multiple steps because they gave you a GPS coordinate and they wanted you to find out what is there and note it in the notes section on that measle. Okay, so so I got onto the internet and said, okay, what is at this location? It turns out to be Wilmington, North Carolina. And then they wanted you to take these GPS frequent coordinates and convert them into degrees, minutes, seconds. And then they gave you a hint, Google GPS converter. And then they wanted you to give the converted coordinates to them through either an email or through a Winlink message. So, Chris, if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, sure. So let me pull you down here for just a second so I can bring my screen up as well. So down here in the bottom, we've got a URL, and we did some searching before the show, and we found several different of these GPS converters. This just happens to be one. There are many out there that you can use. Here, I'll switch back over to my laptop so you can see what this one in particular looks like. It's at latlondata.com/lat-lawn/converter. And there's multiple different ways that you can designate GPS coordinates. You can designate them in various different formats. And one of the challenges is you can oftentimes get in a situation where you can plug in GPS coordinates or lat-long coordinates, and they don't work in whatever system that you're trying to do. So oftentimes you will need to come in and you'll need to plug in numbers into a converter like this to be able to switch them from one format to another, either decimal degrees, which is what a lot of the MCOM stuff works under, where it's just got your latitude with the main number here, and then they break down the entire distance between the two lines of latitude into a decimal format, and you can plug that in. It's a very precise way of doing this. Others are all done in degrees, minutes, seconds, because if you think about the globe is 360 degrees around, and so there's degrees, minutes, seconds, so that you can find the exact location. As somebody who has lived on a sailboat, I did a lot of offshore sailing. A lot of times when you pull up a chart, your charts will have down in the corner that'll say what the location coordinates system is based on, so you can make sure that you get those right. If you don't get those right, so for instance, some of them are in degrees and then decimal minutes, and those, even though the format of them look very similar to what the decimal degrees looks like, if you mess these up, you're going to end up in a completely wrong location. So you really got to pay attention to that. The other thing you also have to pay attention to is the orientation. So for latitude can be either a north designation or a south designation. If you have some of the different formats, they'll have a plus or a minus in front to say whether or not the number is positive or negative, to designate the hemisphere. For longitude, those are all going to be east and west. If you go on to Winlink and you have a group of folks who are sending in Winlink check-ins and they've adjusted and entered in their coordinates wrong, oftentimes they'll show up on the other side of the planet, either the east-west side of the planet or north-south side of the planet, and that's because they have the wrong designator as far as positive or negative. Remember, when you run through the prime meridian, everything that's to the west is going to be on the negative side, everything that's to the right is going to be the positive side. So that simple little location information can make a big difference as to where you appear on planet Earth. If you wanted to be able to plug in that set of coordinates and just copy them out of the task book, you could open a tool such as Google Maps or maybe even Apple Maps on your iOS device or the Maps program within your Android device. Paste in those coordinates, and oftentimes it'll take you directly to that, zoom directly into that location. And there are some tools that you want to make sure that you've got for your local area and your region, that you've got some local maps that are already downloaded onto your devices. So in the case that the internet's not available, you have access to that information available. Let me go ahead and bring Scott back up, and we'll jump into the next task. And that would be task number 16.
Yeah, and task 16 again goes back to a lot of your understanding what your interoperability is, and talks about VTACs or VHF tactical channel. And really, where do you find this information? That's either in your NIFOG or your OXFOG or whatever your local SOPs are. So when we talk about VTACs, those are federal interop or non-federal interop channels that are used out there. And then Chris is showing what can be found in your NIFOG book and the OXFOG. But these are also what your EOC or your emergency management agency is going to be working with. So keep all of these in mind.
Now, when you start thinking about these designations, you'll hear VTACs and UTACs and 8TACs and all of those. If you look at the leading letter of those, so all of the VTACs, we talked earlier about what the tactical channels are and why you would want to use one of those. These are interoperable frequencies, and the V designates that it's the VHF. It's one of these frequencies is going to be VHF tactical frequencies. The UTACs are going to be all UHF frequencies. The 8TACs are 800 megahertz frequencies and so forth. And these are nationally recognized interop frequencies or interoperable frequencies. So let's say there's a large incident that's going on. You may be used to using your own repeaters or your own simplex frequencies in your area, but as you start bringing in additional resources from other locations, you need to be able to establish communication with them. And you would then begin to, your communications unit leader would then start coming up with the assignment for which VTACs or UTACs are going to be used based on the needs of the different agencies that are there, the different operations that are in those locations. So that's what that is. Now, the NIFOG, you can get it off of CISA's website. We've got a link on WaveTalkers in our resources section, so you can go ahead and download a PDF copy of this so that you've got it. But if you would like on your mobile device, there's also a application you can get. It's available for both iOS and Android. And it's called the Public Safety Library. And many of the states and both federal agencies that have these FOGs, or the Field Operations Guides, have converted them into a digital form, and they've made them available for mobile devices. And so you can download just this one application, Public Safety Library, and then from within that application, you'll have access to all of the other Field Operations Guides, and more are being added on a regular basis. But all of these that used to have their own dedicated application have now consolidated them all into one singular application. So if you do not have a copy of it, go on for your platform and get a copy of the Public Safety Library and then download the appropriate FOG. So, for instance, here's a copy of the NIFOG that's in there, the National Interoperability Field Guide. There's the OXFOG for OXCOM, and then a variety of the different states that are in here. Some of the states, such as California, call them iFOGs. Most of the other states will call them an eFOG, or an electronic field operations guides. They all mean pretty much the same thing. And they have all of this incredible information. Certainly suggest going on and downloading that for your area.
And one of the things that I did and I'm trying to get it all finished published, is I created an Aries fog for our Aries group, which took all the frequencies available to us as amateurs and relevant information, and I built a fog book. And it's going to be about the same size as a regular fog manual, but I created one for my group. And that's a really handy piece of information to have in the field, because a lot of times we don't have access to a computer and the internet in the field, and having a manual that fits in your back pocket is really important. So think about creating one for your group of pertinent information.
So task 17, this was about voice traffic on local repeaters. Anything you want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, again, they wanted us to, they talked about their Viper towers, which is their radio system, were damaged. And so they wanted us to get connectivity through talk groups. And so it was something that I couldn't participate in from my location because I don't have access to a lot of their systems. But again, it talks about working with your group, your systems, your clients or served agencies, and how do we connect to each other if systems are down.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I really liked about the way that your Placer Counter Aries group has been set up, Scott, is you have your 205 for your group where you have all of the different frequencies listed and all of the different repeaters, but you've taken it a step further. As you've become the emergency coordinator here, you went out and you created these repeater use agreements. What are those?
So in public safety, a lot of times to use other people's frequencies or other agencies' frequencies, you have to get a frequency use coordination or frequency use agreement with them to be able to put them into your radio. At least in California, you have to for public safety. So I took the same concept and I created a repeater use agreement where I went to all the local repeaters and repeaters that we could potentially have access to, either VHF or UHF, and I went out and found out who the owners were, and I sent them an agreement that says, hey, during an emergency or during an event or during a training, can we use your repeater? Can it be strict use? In other words, we've got complete control of it, or is it going to be coordinated use? And I allowed them to check the box on which it needed to be, and it basically spelled out what we're going to do as a group, how we're going to abide by the rules. We're going to use proper radios. We're going to do things by the book. And what we're asking the repeater owner to do for us and provide us access to that repeater. It's an agreement or just a handshake. And then based upon that, I could take these agreements and then build my communication plan, because I've gotten agreements with these repeater owners that says, yeah, you can use it. And believe it or not, I did get back no.
And just to be clear, these are all amateur radio repeaters, because your Aries group is entirely just a group of amateurs that are supporting within the county that you live in and that you support. So
yeah, and then I also built this agreement into where it needed to be revised every how many years. It was a mutually agreed upon time. It could be every 6 months or every 5 years. But it basically says that within that time frame, we're going to come back and revisit this to see if something's changed. Maybe the repeater owners changed and the new people don't want to be a part of it. I don't know. But this is just a nice way to be able to have that agreement, so we're not tromping onto somebody else's territory.
Excellent. So the next task is task number 18, and it's something about weather forecast. What was that one about?
Yeah, again, this is one of those tasks that have a couple multiple levels to it. Again, they required us to go back to the catalog. Chris, if you want to bring the catalog up.
Yeah, sure.
And they wanted to know a local weather forecast for us. So again, if you want to go to the catalog, Chris.
Yep. Give me a second. I'm just trying to pull you down so
okay,
folks can see it. There we go. So
yeah.
I'm going to close this message here. And so the catalog, remember, is right here in the toolbar. You can get to it there, but you can also go up here to the settings section, and you have access to the Winlink catalog request there as well. So it's another way to get into that. So
right. So I went to the catalog request, and then I scrolled down, kept going down to WX CA, I believe it was. Keep going down a little bit further. No, keep going. US.ca right there. And then I looked at the second one down for my area, which was forecast for the Sac Valley. That's where I'm at. And then I went through the request to make sure there was nothing else. And I said, oh, there's this Northern and Central California one, which looks like it's going to be good. One more up, Chris. Go down, 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 and right. One more. Keep going. One more. Right there. And that one, I requested that one. And then I submitted the request, and then I waited for it.
So one of the things to note also, I'm going to go back into the catalog here. When you are, and we talked about this in the episode 103 where we talked about catalog requests. The catalog can feel a little unwieldy when you first get into it because there's so many items in here. I mean, you can see there's tons of items that are in this. So what you want to do before the disaster, you want to go in and you want to find out what are your local weather reports. Make note of them. Go ahead and favorite those so that you can get back to them in some kind of way. Keep a list somewhere that you know what those are. We walked through an example as to how you could create a catalog request list for all of the different items that you wanted, and then save that email into a particular location so that if it came time for a disaster, you could quickly open up that Winlink message, copy the text for it, create a new message, and send it in. I'll go ahead and cancel that. And you can see here in my outbox, I'll open this up. This is that catalog request, and they all just go to inquiry. The subject is request, and then it's in a very standardized form. So you can create these, you can save them beforehand so that you've got them ready to go for your particular area, submit them, and then you get those files back in. Let me go ahead and jump back over to the slides and bring Scott back up.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, I don't have it available to me, but there are several people in the group that would like to have a copy of that form that I sent you for that repeater use.
Yeah, sure.
If you could post it, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll post it up on the WaveTalkers site.
Okay, great.
We're going to post a lot more information about this episode up on the WaveTalkers site. It'll be in the resources section. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Task number 19. What was this one about? Relationships and current plans?
This goes back to what I've always said. You know, at the time of the incident, it's not the time to be handing out your business card. So we talk about relationships and current plans. So if you're supporting a hospital, that's good to know, but good to know who you're working with. But what type of radio equipment do they already have? I know, like a lot of our local area hospitals where I'm at, have amateur radio gear within their hospital. Like the Kaiser Permanente system, they have the KPARM system, which is the Kaiser Permanente Amateur Radio Network. Sutter Hospital System is building their own amateur radio network. My local Sutter Hospital in the EM's office, he's an amateur. He's got radio gear right in his office. And what is their capability? How can they get out if we need to use it? I mean, and can we use their equipment if we had to? And is it available? And so again, that goes back to relationship building, getting to understand who they are, and are they part of your plan? Can you communicate with them? Do you know that they've got amateur gear, and what frequencies do they operate off of?
You know, back when we did episode 80, which is that creating your own emergency operations playbook, it's kind of the idea is kind of creating your own field operations guide or your own fog, but it's a whole series of different small sections or little chapters that you could go in. And so you would have one that's set up for the hospital that you're supporting, and you would have all of this information. You can build in some reference information available to that agency, that group that you're supporting. What are the capabilities? What are the forms that they use? What are the particular practices that they follow, a list of contacts, so that, as Scott said, you don't want to show up and have to be handing out your business card. You should certainly have business cards available with you that have your contact information, so it's easy to hand somebody. Because a lot of times, if you think about in a hospital, you may have established a relationship with the person who's the lead there, but oftentimes an event may take place that is outside of the normal work schedule. A lot of folks in hospitals work all kind of different schedules, and so you may find yourself showing up and the person that's your normal primary contact is not there because of the time shifting around. So you do want to have copies of your business card available with your basic contact information. It can be pretty generic. It doesn't have to be anything special, but you want to make sure that you have as much information in your playbook going into that incident so that you have a good place so you can hit the ground running when you get there.
So what did I send in? I basically knew what my local area hospital had for communications, and that's kind of what our plan was. And so I submitted that information to the exercise coordinators.
So tied into exercise to task number 19, task 20 is pretty similar, but it's related to the supporting your served agencies. And what's a PSAP?
Public Safety Answering Point. A lot of people, you know it as your 911 center. It goes by that name as well, but this is kind of where all the phone calls come into, and it's one point. And so a lot of your dispatch centers, your 911 centers, they're known as PSAPs. So if you hear that term out there, that's what they're referring to. And this goes back to how can you support your PSAP or your dispatch center through plans. And again, it goes back to developing plans and the ability to have some interoperability with them.
Task number 21. We're almost through them all. What was task number 21 about?
So task 21, I believe, was the last task, if I'm not mistaken.
Second to last.
Second to last one. Yeah, absolutely. What they wanted to make sure that everybody who was participating, if there were multiple people in your group, they wanted to make sure everybody was accounted for to receive credit for this. So, but what does that really mean? Personal accountability is what they're referring to. Is can we account for everybody at the incident? Because again, we have to remember who's all there to make sure everybody gets the word and everybody gets to get home safely. And again, so we have that by utilizing several different ICS forms, which is the assignment list, which is built into Winlink, the communications list, which has phone numbers and things, and then, of course, an incident check-in list. You want to make sure everybody checks in. Guess what you also want to make sure they do is check out to make sure everybody has left the incident. And so go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, let me just quickly walk through this 204, 205, where those are located. So again, you're going to have your new message set up here, and you're going to click on the select template. It'll open you up to the template manager. You go into that. Again, we're inside of the ICS USA forms. Inside of here, you have your ICS 204. That's the assignment list. So essentially, that's once you get into an assignment. A lot of times, if you're going on to an event, your event coordinator or your COML for your event is going to preset up this 204, so it has all the assignments of what your team is going to be doing, all of their contact information, and so forth. There's also a 205A. This is the communications list. This is usually for your own group. This is going to be a list of all of the assignments, the names, and any contact information that's going to be available. And so this information on the 205A is going to be able to feed into that 204. I want to also, while I'm in here, now those are two forms that are available inside of Winlink, but I want to quickly jump over to the WaveTalkers website. And if you go here into the resources section, it's right here at the top, and you scroll down on that page, I've got a little drop down here for the ICS forms. And if you click on that form, it'll bring up a listing of all of the different the common forms that are used for communications units here at the top. But down at the bottom, you'll find there's a link for the all ICS forms, and these are the FEMA forms. There's also a NIMS IAP builder if you're working on building out an entire incident action plan, and then the additional Winlink forms is a direct link to those. But let me go into that FEMA ICS forms page, because if we go to that page, you'll see these are all the PDF copies of all the official forms that are not necessarily all of them are in Winlink. And in here is where that ICS 211 form is. It's right here. That's the incident checklist, the check-in list. So I'll go ahead and bring that up real quick so you can see what the PDF forms look like here. And it's a lot more detailed information. So when you first show up to an incident, likely the person that you're checking in with is going to have one of these forms, and they're going to be filling it out. And on all of these ICS forms, if you go to the form itself, underneath of it on the additional pages is the instructions for you as to how to fill that particular form out. And if you're curious where that information would be located inside of the Winlink forms, let me go back over to that Winlink form. Here's that ICS 205. You'll see there's a link up here at the top for form info. If I click on that, this is the same information for this particular form, for the 205. It gives you all of the purpose and how to fill it out and all the information. And that's available on all of these forms that are here inside of Winlink. So let me bring Scott back up and we'll look at the next item.
And
there.
real quick, and Lloyd brings up a real good point that I neglected to mention. So with the 205A and the 205, that is for official use only. You don't want to be broadcasting everybody's phone number, because keep in mind, some of these are legal documents and people don't need their phone numbers distributed, but that's an internal document for you to keep track of everything out there. You can, but also since they're a legal document, you can retract some information out of there so you don't publicize everybody's information. But it's a really good thing to have and to be able to keep track of everybody.
Excellent. So the last task was task number 22. What was this one about?
Yeah. So finally got to the end, and boy, there was a lot of tasks. And boy, I was happy to see task 22 at the end, because man, I was just beat up by that time. But all the information that we collected through the measle, all the information on that Excel spreadsheet, my ICS 214, my ICS 309, all had to be submitted to the ComU unit back in North Carolina to show that you did your work. That way you get credit for this. So you had to take all this information and send it whatever means necessary to accomplish the task, either by email, either by Winlink, however you could get it to them. They wanted you to get it to them. So Chris, up on the screen, if you want to take me off the screen, Chris, and bring up my form.
Yeah, so let me pull you down here for a second.
So basically here's, and again, this is why I did my ICS 214 in Winlink, because I could just keep track of everything and move through it. And so it made it real convenient for me at the end. I didn't have to scan a document, convert something to PDF. I just sent my ICS 214 to them. And then the next one is my 309. Now some stuff I sent by email. So not everything appears on here. So that was on a separate one, but everything that was sent through my Winlink was tracked.
Now, Scott, you told me that you created this automatically or automagically inside of Winlink. Can you walk me through how I might create an ICS 309 in Winlink?
Absolutely. So if we go to the main Winlink screen and we go to messages and we slide all the way down to generate form 309, communication log, what it does is you select. So what I did with my stuff is I had all documents coming and going selected separate emails. So over here, I could select where I wanted this 309 generated from. And inbox and outbox were select messages. So if we move over to the left, I could select, uncheck, and select what I wanted. So I had my inbox and outbox selected. And then I selected my date range, date and time range. So I wanted it between 5 a.m. my time and 12 p.m. my time. So I wanted to make sure that I captured all of my information out there.
I'll just select another time here. Go ahead.
Right, and then I kept everything on the layout, and then date and time on the form, and then my task name was 2024. For the task name was 2024 EHPC ComX. And then my operational period was my time that I put on there, who I was, and what my station ID was. And then I clicked down. I could do this two different ways. I could either do it as a PDF or basically a comma separated value file. I chose PDF. And then where I want it to go. I got to remember where I'm sending it so I can resend it later. So once I've created it, I just went back into Winlink, created a message, attached a form to it, attached my 309, and sent it off. So
awesome.
It worked out real well. So I didn't have to be writing something down on paper. A lot of times I could cut and paste what I needed to do and send it off to them.
You know, Scott, one of the things that I was really impressed with when you called me up later this week and you said, hey, I just went through this whole exercise. You were so excited that you had learned so much since coming on board, really as one of the instructors. But over the past year, you've really watched a lot of our episodes that we've done as well. And I started to kind of go through just a little bit. And these are just some of the Winlink episodes that we've done here on WaveTalkers, starting literally at episode number 1 and episode 107, 108, and now 109 are all related to a lot of Winlink content as well. But all of these are dedicated episodes, and none of these are the ones that include the episodes that we've created relative to the Winlink gateways. We have a whole nother series on those. You can find all of those on our website and also on our YouTube channel as well. So I just want to kind of bring those up here real quick before we switch back over and bring up the map to see where folks have been checking in. So great job on doing that. We'll chat a little bit more at the wrap up here, but I want to go in and do a quick little one more session check to make sure we've gotten all of the Winlink check-ins.
Yeah, while you're doing that, Chris. So yeah, and Chris was right. When I got done with this, I felt pretty beat up, but I had a really good understanding of where things were because of going through a lot of the WaveTalker videos and going through the program. And, you know, I was kind of taken back by surprise because when I originally read the exercise manual, it just, the way I interpret it was, oh, if you're outside the area, you're just going to create a hospital bed report and you're going to send that in and you're going to be done. And I thought, oh, that's going to be it. But when I got into the briefing and they said, oh, by the way, there's this entire measle here that on all these tasks you have to do. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not just doing one thing. I got a bunch of work to do. And boy, that changed my whole outlook on this exercise because now I really had to tax my brain on how to make things work. How do I get this to go through? And how do I produce the products they're looking for? So that was my biggest challenge.
All right. I'm going to bring up, I've done a last check here to see that we've gotten all of the check-ins. I'm going to bring up the map. It's right there, this globe icon right here on the desktop. And I've got selected the Winlink Check-In V5. That's the latest version of the Winlink check-in form. I'm going to come down here and hit the display map icon or button, and that's going to bring up the map. I'll go ahead and blow that out to full screen if I can click on the button here, and let me go ahead and zoom all the way out so we'll get a good global perspective. I like to start out here with those, and it looks like we've got Bill joining us from Hawaii, Kilo Hotel 6 uniform. Thanks a lot for checking in. Aloha to you, Bill. Looks like we've got Terry down in ZL land, and we also have Richard there in the Sydney area joining us. Love to see that. Sydney's, you can see his pin is colored purple because he sent his in via RF, and you can see a lot of the other pins around here are also colored purple as well. This is Roland joining us from Germany, and Franz joining us from Austria, and Sierra Mike 7, Oscar Yankee Echo joining us from Sweden. Great to see you there. Let me zoom back in on North America. I'll click the zoom in button a couple of times and hold down the right click button and zoom in. I want to roll over all the pins here to make sure that we can see where everyone is coming in from. As I start to roll over some of these, you'll see several of them that have the purple pin, like this one, November 3 Whiskey Sierra. Let me come back up here to the filter real quick so you can get a sense what I'm doing here. And where these check-ins have come in via HF or via VARA at HF, those are all colored purple right now. So let me go ahead and click the drop-down menu. I'm going to change this over to VHF, and I'll change it to VARA VHF or VARA FM, and we'll set save, because those are also now going to be purple. We'll click on those, and you can see that the pin colors have all changed for stations who have now sent in their check-ins via VHF RF. So we've got several more stations here. We'll just roll over these. It looks like I am going to have to zoom in here on the Georgia area, because we've got several stations now joining us down here in this area. So I want to make sure everybody's able to see their pins as we roll over them in here. We got quite a few more down here in the south that are joining us, here in Alabama, down here in Florida. We've got few more outside of the Georgia area. Down here in Louisiana, great collection of stations down in there, down in Houston area, Galveston, Dallas, King out here in a little bit of West Texas. Let me zoom back out a little bit here. We'll come back up into the middle of the country. We'll pick up a few more of these stations. We've got Ed there in Indianapolis, and station here in Albuquerque, station here joining us in Utah, there in Montana, up in that area in Idaho, Seattle area, Washington, Portland, quite a few here in the Piedmont area, up in the Sacramento Valley, San Francisco, Central Valley area, stations out here in Las Vegas. And let me zoom into Southern California, because we usually have quite a few that are down in this area. Make sure people can see that we did get the pins for them that are located in there. Eric and Craig and Logan and all those stations. So, hey, thanks a lot for joining us. If you find any of this information helpful, please be sure to like the video out on our YouTube channel. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you learned as part of today's episode. If you really found the information helpful, consider going on to the WaveTalkers website. We've got a Buy Us a Coffee link. It helps us keep all the infrastructure that we've got up and running to keep the show going all the time. I'm going to bring the guys back up here. As I do, I should note that next week is field day, so we are not going to have a live show next week. So if you are one of the regulars who are watching the show, certainly thank you very much for always showing up. Big thanks to all of our supporters who are always great to be able to support us. And but just be aware, we're not going to be doing a live show. We'll pick it back up in July. Scott, great job today going through all of that. Wonderful job doing the exercise. Any closing thoughts from you on for today?
Well, this was the first time our group participated in something like this. So come next year, I'm going to get a lot more people involved and break up these tasks, because 22 tasks for one person was a lot of work, and getting other people in the group involved will make it a lot easier and get more people trained. And what I understand from the briefing is that they do this exercise twice a year, like I said earlier, one in the spring, which is a much larger one, versus this one. This is a hurricane exercise just to kind of get everybody geared up for hurricane season for that region of the country. But I'm so looking forward to next year for their exercise in the spring. I really, really want to participate in it. And I think it'd be good for groups to get on board with this, because it will give you a lot of realistic training that you don't have to travel to.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, if you participated in this exercise on the 13th of June, leave us a comment and let us know what you thought of the exercise, and then what you thought of how we covered it here in this episode. David, what else was going on in the chat today?
Just a lot of support, a lot of folks that wanted the documentation. I think this was a great exercise. I'd love to bring something like this to the WaveTalkers audience in the future.
Excellent. Dan, any closing thoughts from you this week?
Well, first of all, great job, Scott. this was a very elaborate exercise, well beyond anything we've done out here. And I'd like to see us working towards it. I don't know that if it was thrown at us right now, how well we do, but they obviously have built up to this, and it raises the bar.
You know, one of the things that I was most impressed with was the organizational structure, the tree of all of the different agencies and different groups that were participating, having those separate tasks that were lined out for them all. It creates, I think, a really strong roadmap for any group to be able to create something, maybe not even on such a large scale, but even a smaller scale that's targeted for your particular organization, or reach out to some of the adjacent groups that may be operating near you. I know here in Southern California, we have fires that will cross county lines very quickly, very easily. And so there's not a way to really stay isolated. As a matter of fact, as real as this is, Dan just brought up on screen, there is an active fire that's maybe about 40 miles away from us, 50 miles away from us all right now. And all of David and Dan and I are all in different counties, but this fire is kind of in the general vicinity that all of us may be called to be able to provide some mutual aid. All of our different agencies that we may work with may be showing up to be able to provide mutual aid to this. So all this is real-time stuff, and it doesn't matter what portion of the country you live in. You may be living in an area where you're having to deal with hurricanes, and other areas where you're having to deal with tornadoes and severe storms, fires, earthquakes. All of these things happen, tsunamis. All these happen all the time on a pretty regular basis, so it's always good to be prepared. And exercises like this are absolutely amazing to participate in. You don't have to have everybody all physically on site to do this, to benefit from that, as we saw from this exercise. So if you're here inside of our Zoom, then thanks. Hang around. We'll do the after party here in just a few minutes. If you'd like to join us for our after party anytime, be sure to go on to WaveTalkers.com. At the bottom of every page is a join us link. It's also up at the top in the header. Fill that out. It's just a simple form. We send out one email each week, and it can get you access into our live Zoom audience here, and hang around for the after party where we open up the mics and take questions. And with that, we'll see everybody in July. So again, we won't have a show next week. We'll be back the week after that. So thanks a lot, everyone. 7-3.